You're listening to the Hour of the Time, and what a time it is. I'm your host, William Cooper, for Swiss America Trading. As you know, a fire has caused us to move from WWCR. And when our friends at Swiss America Trading heard about the fire, they went right to work finding us another place to broadcast. Within just a matter of hours, a new station, this station, WRNO, was found, thus making it possible for this program to continue to get the truth out to the world. The people, folks, at Swiss America Trading stand behind this program, and I want you to stand behind them. Swiss America Trading deals in protecting their clients through non-confiscatable, non-reportable hard assets. Now, you've heard me inform you about the trouble this country is in, both politically and financially, and the time to act is now. Don't wait until it's too late. Call the experts at Swiss America Trading at 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646, and have them show you how to protect yourself. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Do it right now and mention my name, William Cooper, for a free newsletter on protecting your future. By protecting your future, folks, you're keeping the future of this program and freedom for the world alive. Call today, 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Do it right now, and you'll be glad that you did.
In the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho, eagles gathered there together to guard the truth, so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock to mark the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bride and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise let the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals, and FBI men stormed the hill, all on false, fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, they're the host of heavenly angels hovering near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver. We are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is.
The delivery of World of Radio to WRNO is made possible by a grant from George Thurman. Production made possible by a grant from Review of International Broadcasting, the magazine for shortwave listeners. In North America, $2.50 for a sample to Review of International Broadcasting, Box 81874, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87198, USA. This is Glenn Hauser with World of Radio number 690.
That's the beginning of the show called World of Radio, brought to you by Glenn Hauser. During a recent episode of the World of Radio, Glenn Hauser interviewed George McClintock, the general manager of WWCR. As you all probably know, WWCR was burned to the ground in the early morning hours of April the 4th, 1993, and that's why we're broadcasting to you now from WRNO in New Orleans. We're going to play for you now a portion of that interview which will tell you exactly what happened at WWCR on that early Sunday morning, so that you will know, folks, that the enemy is not playing. We've been at war for a long, long time. For those of you who don't understand it, many battles have been fought, some with loss of life. One occurred in Idaho at the cabin of Randy Weaver. You're going to hear more about that later on this program. The most recent battle was fought in Waco, Texas, the Waco Massacre. And every time I go on the air, folks, I am fighting a part of that battle, and so are many others. So if you weren't aware of it, listen closely. We would like to thank Glenn Hauser for his permission to use this segment of his radio show, The World of Radio.
The World of Radio is a listener-supported public service program about communications around the world, especially shortwave. On this edition, recorded April 15th. It was arson at WWCR. We hear the details and the station's current plans. First, I must make sure you know how to contact me. If you have DX News you'd like to phone in for this program or DX Daily, it's 1-505-266-9012. That's 1-505-266-9012. And the P.O. Box in Albuquerque is 81874, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87198, USA. I've also arranged for fax, not at the same phone number as I had previously planned, but at a different number. This is an organization which is willing to receive fax messages from me. However, it's rather inconveniently located, and I probably won't be picking them up every day. I will make a point of putting them at least on Mondays and Thursdays around midday. If you want to time your fax transmissions, you can send them anytime during the 24 hours, and be sure each page is headed for the attention of Glenn Hauser. The number is 505-237-1042. Now, if you're in the U.S. and you think you just got to fax me something, you might reconsider. Perhaps it would do just as well to send it in the U.S. mail. It would still get to me in perhaps 3 or 4 days. But from overseas, it should be especially useful to expedite the arrival of DX News for this program or DX Daily. Again, the fax number, 505-237-1042. But this won't be in effect until Monday, the 19th of April. It's time for an update on the situation at WWCR Nashville, both on their latest plans for coming back and on the investigation into the fire. On Thursday, April 15th, I talked to General Manager George McClintock.
The building at this moment, of course today is Thursday afternoon, it's got about 2 little tiny walls standing, and everything else has been leveled and hauled away in big giant trucks. The transmitters were hauled away yesterday, and they worked until about 7 o'clock tonight. They've also leveled the land for our temporary building, so both of those will begin momentarily as soon as all this demolition takes place. Temporary building going up pretty quick. We should have both transmitters online, I'd say 5-6 weeks. They're being built at Continental right now. The antennas were basically undamaged. There were some minor problems, but nothing of major importance. Everything was destroyed. Best guess that everybody can make on it is a gallon of gasoline on a certain portion of the building, around the backside between two air intakes where it was fairly well protected from visible aspects. Of course, in the future we will have surveillance systems out there and alarms running continuously and continuous recording and remote monitoring sensors. So I think our security will pick up 1,000% after this particular problem.
So are you saying you're pretty sure it was arson, and were there traces of gasoline?
No, they have not found traces of gasoline. The gasoline, when it's properly placed, of course, burns up. The fire was started on the outside, right where there is nothing, and it was a rather intense flame, enough to go up and melt the matching transformers insulators on the transmission line, actually melt them. There's nothing on the outside of the building that could produce that kind of flame. It proceeded inside the transmission line window, which is just a feed-through window for the RF. Went inside there, but first it melted the insulators on the outside, so you know it started on the outside. Then it proceeded to melt the window, which is space-age plastic, and then that pulled out because the transmission line was still connected. It proceeded in the window, up in the wall, into the ceiling, and proceeded to between the ceiling and the roof, which is about 6, 7, 8 inches. I don't know exactly, maybe 8 or 10, probably 8 or 10 inches. Proceeded along there and got to the middle part of the building. At approximately the same time it got to the middle part of the building, started to exit the number 2 transmitter's window. It went out. When it went out, it melted the window, and the transmission line pulled out because it was under tension from the transmission line down the field, and the insulators were totally undamaged. The fire then was in the middle of the building, and the ceiling collapsed, and that was the first sign of real trouble. Actually, the gals at night, our operator at night, noticed puffs of smoke coming by, and she ran up and down in different buildings looking for, and different transmitters behind them looking for the smoke for the fire, but there was none that she could observe. And when she came back to the center of the building, the called fire department, ceiling collapsed, and she got out.
And there you have it, folks. Arson at WWCR. Fire started from outside where there was nothing that could have started a fire. It did not start in the transmitters or in any of the electrical connections. You heard the testimony from George McClintock being interviewed by Glenn Hauser of World of Radio. And the information, I might add, if we had played that interview a little farther, George McClintock states that the information that he gave us during that interview was directly from the fire investigators. So it's not conjecture, it is what the fire investigators from the fire department have put together, and they state that's what happened. WWCR is planning to be back on the air May 15th, which means if everything goes well, and they begin again broadcasting on Saturday, May 15th, that means the hour of the time will resume its broadcasting on WWCR at the same old time slot, just like before, folks. So stay tuned and spread the word to the people who have not been able to receive WRNO so that they'll be ready to listen once again to the hour of the time and all the wonderful, great programming on WWCR, again beginning May 15th, and that's based upon everything going well. If they have some kind of a problem, it could be held up for a day or 2 or 3 or 4. So Those are the plans. So watch for WWCR to be back on the air again on Saturday, May 15th, or if there's a holdup, shortly thereafter. We're going now to begin a series of episodes of the Hour of the Time. I'm going to read you verbatim, folks, and if you want to, we're going to make this available. I don't know how much it's going to cost yet. Do not send us any money. Don't write and ask for it right now. We'll tell you within the next show or two how much this is going to cost and how you can get it. And of course, as always, it will be much cheaper for CAGI members than it will be for anyone else. If you would like to obtain this for yourself, you can go to the United States District Court for the District of Idaho and ask for this and get it yourself. It is in the United States District Court for the District of Idaho, United States of America versus Randall C. Weaver and Kevin L. Harris, defendants. This is entitled Memorandum in Support of Defendants' Motions to Disqualify United States Attorney's Office, to dismiss the indictment, to strike for prejudicial allegations, to order an evidentiary hearing, for a continuance pending an investigation by the United States Attorney General and pending any interlocutory appeals by the parties. It was filed by G.L. Spence and Kent W. Spence, Spence, Moriarty, and Schuster, 15 South Jackson Street, Post Office Box 548, Jackson, Wyoming, 83001. And Charles F. Peterson, Gary L. Gilman of Orndorff, Peterson, Hawley, White, and Gilman, 1087 West River Street, Suite 230, Boise, Idaho, 83702. This brief was filed on behalf of Randall C. Weaver and Kevin L. Harris, defendants. It is a memorandum in support of defendants' motions. What you're going to hear during this episode of the Hour of the Time, the next several episodes of the Hour of the Time, is what's in this brief verbatim. I'm going to give it to you verbatim as it was filed, folks, and we will be making it available for you if you want to get it from us. If you want to get it from the court, you can. Okay, and I've already given you the information that you need to get that from the court. Let me give you the numbers just in case you need those. It's criminal numbers 90-092-N-HLR semicolon 91-020-N-HRL semicolon 92-080-N-HLR and 92-081-N-HLR period. Make sure you don't miss tonight or the next few episodes of the Hour of the Time. These will be rebroadcast on WWCR. The facts. Prior to the so-called standoff at Ruby Ridge, which commenced on August 21st, 1992, Randy Weaver was treated by federal authorities as a fugitive from justice. He had been asked by federal undercover agents to provide them with sawed-off shotguns for an agreed price per gun. Mr. Weaver had no prior criminal record of any nature. He had no propensity to commit crimes. However, he was induced by federal authorities to do so and was thereafter immediately confronted by federal agents who demanded that he go undercover for them against the Aryan nations. And this can be found in Byerly Grand Jury Testimony, page 26. When Weaver refused, a warrant was issued for his arrest. He and Vicky were seized by plainclothes officers when they stopped to help what appeared to be people in distress and took Randy Weaver into custody. That can be found also in Byerly Grand Jury Testimony, page 30. Mr. Weaver was released on bond, but thereafter allegedly failed to appear at the time the case was set for trial. His reasons now seem obvious. Vicky told reporters in the Wheeling Grand Jury Testimony, page 17, that she would not let Randy go down because he would be railroaded by the federal authorities. The federal authorities had already lied to the Weavers. Why, she reasoned, should they expect different treatment now? Thereafter, Weaver remained at his house on Ruby Ridge with his family for 20 months, during which time federal marshals undertook various strategies to arrest him. United States Deputy Marshal Roderick stated at the preliminary hearing before Magistrate Williams that the marshals had surreptitiously been on the Weaver property on more than a dozen occasions. That's from the 9/10/92 preliminary hearing, page 45. On August 21st, 1992, the United States Marshals, under orders not to have contact with any member of the Weaver household, and above all, not to injure any of the Weaver children, undertook what they now call a reconnaissance mission. The Weaver children included Sarah, 16, Sammy, 13, Rachel, 10, and the nursing baby girl, Elishaba, 10 months. Apparently, the marshals intended something quite in excess of a mere reconnaissance mission. Although they were under strict orders not to engage any member of the Weaver family in a confrontation, the officers, in preparation for this alleged reconnaissance mission, went to a shooting range where they spent several hours sighting in their guns. And this is from 822 and 2892, Roderick 302, page 3. Moreover, the marshals brought with them a medic and medical equipment. And that's from 822 and 2892, Roderick 302, page 2, in obvious anticipation that someone would be injured. The marshals knew from their investigation that the Weavers had several times confronted people on their property whom the Weavers suspected were U.S. Marshals intent on arresting Randy Weaver. That's from Roderick 9/10/92, grand jury testimony, page 31. The marshals knew that although the Weavers were armed during these confrontations, and even though the Weavers suspected that the persons were marshals, nevertheless, such intruders were confronted without violence and none were injured. That's from 8/27/92, affidavit of Keith M. Hunter, page 5-5 through 8, from the Kittle grand jury testimony. The marshals had learned by previous experience that the Weavers would come out of their home whenever the dogs were alerted, and that members of the family would investigate when the dogs began to bark. And this is from Roderick 9/10/92, grand jury testimony, page 26. The marshals knew that the Weavers usually carried firearms when they came out of the house, but that they had a long history of non-violence, even under stressful and suspicious circumstances. In face of this history, the marshals' apparent strategy was to engage the Weavers while they were armed, which even in the face of their alleged orders not to engage the Weavers, would provide the marshals cause to use deadly force against the Weavers. On August 21st, 1992, the marshals divided themselves into two teams. Deputy Marshal Roderick sent one team to an area identified as the Y, while the other team, consisting of Roderick, Deegan, and Cooper, entered the Weaver property. Roderick now admits that his team was throwing rocks toward the Weaver house, and this is taken from Roderick grand jury testimony, page 40, thus taunting the dogs. Later, contrary to these admissions by Roderick, Marshal Jack Clough of Moscow, Idaho, told the press that the Weavers had loosed their dogs on an approaching vehicle. And this is from Bonner's Ferry Herald, entitled Clues at Weaver Cabin by Mike Wayland. The dogs were disturbed by the marshals' rock throwing, and the prelude to the forbidden confrontation began. The marshals ran, and as must have been fully anticipated, the family golden Labrador started to follow the trail. This is from 822 and 2892, Roderick 302, page 7. But having already anticipated that the lab would follow, the marshals had pre-armed Marshal Cooper with a 9mm submachine gun equipped with a silencer for the confessed purpose of shooting the dog. From Roderick grand jury testimony, page 49. As must have been fully anticipated by the marshals, when the dogs began to bark at the taunting officers, Kevin Harris, Randy Weaver, and his 13-year-old son, Sammy Weaver, came out of the house to determine the cause. Also, as fully predicted, the Weavers carried along their hunting long arms. And that's from 8/27/92, affidavit of Keith Hunter, pages 5 through 7. As must have also been anticipated, they followed the dog to see what was causing all of the commotion. The Weavers hoped the dog was on the trail of a large animal, and that was from 9192 Harris 302, page 1. In the meantime, the dog was closing the gap on the marshals with the boys close behind. In accordance with their plan, the marshals took hiding places in the heavy trees and undergrowth along the road and waited for the dog and the two boys to come running by. That's from 822 and 2892 Roderick 302, page 7. They undoubtedly expected Randy Weaver to be with them. Instead, as we have seen, only Kevin Harris and the boy were following the dog. 822 and 2892 Roderick 302, page 7. The dog passed Cooper, but the boys were close behind the dog, so Cooper elected not to shoot the dog because, as he admitted, if he killed the dog, I believed it would precipitate a firefight. This is from the preliminary hearing, Cooper, page 240, 9/11/92. Cooper said, quote, "I just can almost feel the bullets flying at any time," unquote. From the Cooper Grand Jury Testimony 9/15/92, page 26. He let the dogs pass and took deeper cover in the trees behind Deegan. The dog then passed Roderick and continued up the road 20 to 30 feet. From Roderick 9/15/92, Grand Jury Testimony, page 53. Since Cooper had not shot the dog as planned, Roderick now fired. Roderick 9/15/92, Grand Jury Testimony, page 54. The bullet shattered the dog's spine and the dog let out a yelp. Weaver's Harris statement, page 1, back. Since it was shot through the spine, 8/24/92, Dr. Roland Houston Hall, 302. It likely cried out in great pain, pulling itself about on its front legs for some time before it died, during all of which time the dog was in plain view of the boys. This is from Roderick 9/15/92, Grand Jury Testimony, page 56. Thus a confrontation, contrary to the marshal's orders, was fully assured. Indeed, a forbidden confrontation with one of the Weaver children. To the horror of 13-year-old Sammy Weaver, he saw a man in a full camouflage suit brutally shoot his dog. This is from Weaver's Harris Statements, page 2. Roderick testified that up to this point, no one he could identify had fired at the officers. Hence, by Roderick's admission, the first shot was fired by Roderick when he shot the family pet. When Sammy saw his dog shot, he yelled, quote, "You shot Stryker, you son of a bitch," unquote. Thereafter, Sammy fired his gun, a .23 caliber Mini 14, in Roderick's direction. This is from Weaver Harris Statement, page 2. There is no allegation or suggestion in this case that the boy hit anyone. In the meantime, the officers opened fire with their fully automatic weapons and submachine gun. Kevin Harris said he saw spent brass cartridges flying around and smoke puffs in the bushes where the marshals were hiding. 9/1/92 Harris 302, page 2. At the same time, Harris says he saw Sammy running toward home with his back to the officers. The child was crying out in pain, having been hit in the arm by the marshal's fire. Harris says he heard Randy Weaver, who was out of sight of the shooting, call to his son to come home. That's from 9/1/92 Harris 302, page 2. Then Harris heard the boy call back, quote, "I'm coming, Dad," unquote. Weaver's Harris Statement, page 1, back. Those were the last words Sammy ever spoke. There was a lull in the shooting. Then there was another shot, and Sammy cried out, and then there was silence. 9/1/92 Harris 302, page 2. Seeing that Sammy had been shot, and fearing for his own life, Harris opened fire in the direction of those who had been shooting from the bushes. He believed he shot the officer who had been firing at Sammy. Weaver's Harris Statement, page 2. After that, Harris made his way up to Sammy's body, examined the boy's body, and found that he was dead, shot through the back as he ran home. Harris 9/1/92 302, page 3. Don't go away, folks. This is hot stuff. We'll be right back after this very short pause. William Cooper, folks, for Swiss America Trading Corporation. Now, if you followed my broadcast for any length of time, and we've been on since May the 4th, 1992, you know I've been bringing you news of the world, mostly without sponsorship. In part, I've been leery of allowing just any corporation or any business or any company or any person to buy time on my show, and many people made application, and they were all refused except for two, the Pilot Connection and Backwoods Home Magazine. And if you've listened to the show, you know that they only sponsored a couple of episodes each. Well, Backwoods Home Magazine will be back with us in the future. But I'm proud to announce a new alliance with Swiss America Trading Corporation. And Swiss America Trading Corporation and myself are committed to preparing my listening audience for the upcoming economic trauma. And believe me, folks, it's coming. For over 11 years, Swiss America has been supplying over 10,000 clients with hard assets and constant information on how best to protect those assets. And for a limited time, interested listeners can receive a complimentary newsletter if you just mention my name, William Cooper, and ask for the information on, quote, protecting your future, unquote. Now, I've read this, folks, and it's packed full of information that you need to know. It doesn't cost you a thing. Call 1-800-289-2646 right now. Don't procrastinate. Call 1-800-289-2646 today, now. Do it now, and invest the time it takes to read one of the most important publications of our times. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. You'll be glad that you did.
In the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho, eagles gathered there together to guard the truth, so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock to mark the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bride and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise let the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals, and FBI men stormed the hill, all on false, fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, there's a host of heavenly angels hovering near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver. We are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is.
Before the shooting began, Randy Weaver, who had separated from Harris and Sammy, came on to one of the camouflaged marshals, and when he did, Weaver turned and ran. By the time the shooting started, Weaver was out of sight of the Y, running toward the house and calling out to his son to come home. He fired his shotgun into the air and later his pistol, attempting to get the boy's attention. He finally heard his son cry out, quote, "I'm coming, Dad," unquote, from Weaver's Harris statement, page 1 and 2 back. Then Randy Weaver ran on to the house and waited. When the boy did not show up, Randy shot more rounds into the air, trying to attract the boy's attention. Weaver's Harris statement, 1 and 1 back. After the smoke cleared, the U.S. Marshals realized they were in serious trouble. William Deegan, their colleague, was shot through the chest and had died. A child was dead along with the child's dog. Both child and dog were shot in the back. 8/25/92 autopsy report of Samuel Weaver. 8/24/92 Dr. Roland Houston Hall, 302. Although this information has still not been released to the press. The Marshals must have realized that these deaths were, in fact, totally attributable to their violation of orders against confrontation and the admonition not to injure any of the Weaver children under any circumstances. Moreover, Deegan's death occurred under circumstances that are still in serious doubt, for although Harris thought he killed Deegan in the melee attempting to defend Sammy and himself, the officers must have known that the circumstances surrounding Deegan's death would soon be fully investigated, and that the results might well establish that the officers themselves, not Harris, had killed Deegan during their wild and irresponsible automatic gunfire. As to the boy, no one could mistake him for an adult. This 13-year-old was no larger than an average 10-year-old, 70 to 80 pounds, per the 8/25/92 autopsy report. His voice, when he hollered out that the man had shot his dog, was the voice of a child. The child was shot by the officers running home. They had no warrant to arrest either Harris or the boy. The officers, now responsible for the death of two people, while Weaver himself had escaped, began to consider how to explain their conduct. After Deegan and Sammy were shot, Harris returned to the Weaver house. Randy had arrived before Harris. By this time, no one from the Weaver household was within half a mile of the Marshals. Moreover, the landscape is such that hills and dense vegetation intervene between the Y where the Marshals hid and where the Weaver house was situated, so that the house was completely out of sight of the Y. Yet the Marshals now began to act as if they were under siege. By this time, Hunt, Thomas, and Norris arrived at the Y. Now all the Marshals were soon to claim that they were pinned down in a firefight, and that's from 8/22 and 30/92, Hunt 302, page 7. Despite the supposed rain of fire that, quote, pinned them down, unquote, Hunt and Thomas traveled down the hill to the Rouse residence again without incident. In truth, while the Marshals were telling the world that they were under siege and, quote, pinned down by fire, unquote, 9/1/92 affidavit of Richard Rogers, page 1 and 4, the Weavers and Harris had located Sammy's body and carried it back to their residence, where they placed the body in what has become known as the birthing shed. There, while the Marshals were supposedly pinned down by fire, they claimed for 12 hours until they were rescued by a SWAT team, 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 20, the Weavers, stricken with grief, began to prepare their child for a home burial. In the meantime, the Marshals began to spread a false story concerning the incident, a story that would result in the infamous standoff at Ruby Ridge, the death of Vicki Weaver, and the wounding of Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris. Hunt called the sheriff's office and made several other phone calls, including calls to the Marshal office. 8/22/92 Hunt 302, page 8. He told Mrs. Rao that the Marshals had been ambushed, that the Marshals had been fired on, and that the Marshals themselves had not fired back. 8/26/92 Rao 302, page 3. He further told the sheriff's office and his own office that the Marshals were, quote, pinned down, unquote, by fire. Contrary to the latter sworn testimony of the Marshals, Marshal Jack Clough now told the press another false scenario. He told the press that Randy Weaver had opened fire on the Marshals, and this is from Bonner's Ferry Herald, Clues at Weaver Cabin by Mike Wayland. although the marshals admit they never saw Randy Weaver fire a shot in their direction. He also told the press that the marshals returned fire on both Weaver and Harris, and this is from Bonner's Ferry Herald, Clues at Weaver's Cabin by Mike Wayland. The marshals admit they never fired at Weaver. Contrary to the later testimony of the marshals that the dog never attacked them, Clough told the press that the family dog had not only attacked one but two deputies, and this is again from the story in the Bonner's Ferry Herald, Clues at Weaver Cabin by Mike Wayland. The killing of Sammy Weaver and his dog was completely omitted from the marshal's report to the FBI and to the press. They acted instead as if they did not know the killing had taken place, later claiming they did not know that Sammy had been shot or who shot him. Yet the boy screamed out when he was hit and laid on the ground in a pool of his own blood until his body was removed. In fact, law enforcement officials tested the ground for blood in the area where the child's body had lain. The Washington, D.C. office of the U.S. Marshals called in the FBI. This office conveyed the same false story that the Marshals were currently pinned down by fire and were under siege, and that a U.S. Marshal had been murdered. 9/30/92, Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 12 and 13. The FBI mobilized, calling in their crack hostage rescue teams from around the country. They deployed snipers. They called in the National Guard. Armored personnel carriers were sent to Ruby Ridge. Officers from Spokane, Salt Lake City, and Washington, D.C. were mobilized. Hundreds of specially trained agents began to arrive at the scene. Two large government transport planes brought in equipment of all kinds, a helicopter, radio and TV equipment, a robot, and hordes of other equipment. The Red Cross was called in to set up facilities to feed the officers and men. Units of the National Guard were mobilized. What a few hours before had been a peaceful little mountain home was overnight literally turned into a war zone, some claiming there were as many as 400 men with their arms and other war equipment at Ruby Ridge. Based on the false information given them by the marshals, the heads of the FBI teams now briefed their snipers that this was a continuing firefight. And that's from the Rogers Grand Jury, page 14. As is now undisputed at the time of the shooting, Vicki was at the house with her baby. But the marshals told the FBI, and the FBI told its snipers, that the real force behind the Weavers was Vicki Weaver herself. She was the fanatical one, the religious zealot who might kill the children and herself. 9/30/92, Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 10. Are you beginning, folks, to see the similarities between what happened at Randy Weaver's cabin in Idaho and the Waco massacre? I hope you're listening to this, and I hope you understand what it is that you're hearing. For what you're hearing is so important that I cannot impress upon you enough how important it is. Allegedly, the Weavers embraced the precepts of the Aryan Nations, an organization of right-wing religious radicals who taught white supremacy. 9/30/92, Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 22. Before the briefing was over, the Weavers were characterized as skinhead types led by the fanatical Vicki, who, unless somehow neutralized, would prevent the other members of the family from surrendering. Today, the FBI claims it was never told by the marshals of Sammy's death, and that the first time the FBI learned of Sammy's death was when one of the FBI agents, during the siege that followed, found his naked body in the birthing shed. 9/30/92, Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 69 and 70. The negotiator for the FBI, when informed of this, said he immediately thought, quote, "My God, the Weavers are killing their own children," unquote. That's from Lansley, Grand Jury Testimony, page 75. The story relayed to the FBI and thereafter by the FBI to the media was simple, to the point, and again false. The marshals had been attacked by the Weaver clan, and that these white supremacists had killed Officer Dagan, and that the officers were under siege and pinned down by fire. Moreover, the FBI told the media, as well as this court, that the Weaver children themselves were being held hostage and being used by their parents as quote, human shields, unquote. And folks, that is exactly the same story that they gave the press and you sheeple out there that condemned 86 people at the Waco massacre to death by fire. And this, folks, is taken right out of the 8/27/92 affidavit of Keith Hunter, page 4, and also a story written in the Bonners Ferry Herald, Clues at Weaver Cabin, by Mike Wayland. On their way to the siege site, the FBI established what the FBI calls, quote, rules of engagement, unquote. That is, rules by which the FBI snipers and assaulters might kill the Weavers and Kevin Harris. These rules were intended by their operation to eliminate all of the adults at the Weaver residence, including Vicki Weaver, for as the FBI already knew, when any of the adult Weavers came out of the house, they usually carried a weapon. 8/27/92, affidavit of Keith Hunter, page 5 through 7. And would therefore, under these rules of engagement, be shot. Under these rules, the FBI could eliminate all witnesses who might have otherwise given testimony as to the illegal acts committed by the officers at the Y as described above. At the same time, the killing of all of the adults would, of course, avenge Deegan's death. Richard Rogers, the commander of the hostage rescue team, testified that the FBI's first rules of engagement were that any armed adult at the Weaver residence should be killed, whether they were menacing anyone or not. 9/30/92, Rogers' grand jury testimony, page 16, et sequitur. For example, if an adult came out the door with a weapon, presumably even a BB gun, that adult should be, quote, neutralized, unquote. If the adult laid down in the sun with a gun over his stomach, presumably he would be killed. Indeed, the mere possession of a weapon of any kind was apparently sufficient under these rules for any adult at the scene to be, quote, eliminated, unquote. These rules of engagement were illegal, since the FBI possesses no power to change the law in order to permit officers to kill when the officers or others are not in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. These illegal rules of engagement were to be executed by expert snipers who surrounded the house and who were armed with Model 700 Remington single-shot target rifles equipped with 10-power scopes and especially designed for precision shooting at great distances up to 1,000 yards. 9/17/92, Horiuchi grand jury testimony, pages 22 and 23. The snipers were also supplied with deadly accurate match-grade ammunition. When the FBI teams arrived at the scene, the marshals were obviously not under siege. The local sheriff had gone to the Y and led the marshals out without incident. Yet the record is silent on any attempt by the FBI to make an independent inquiry of their own to determine the existence of any danger to anyone before the FBI loosed their snipers on the Weavers. There is nothing in the record to show that the FBI made an attempt to independently determine what had actually occurred at the Y before they decided to shoot the Weavers. No effort of any kind was made to set up communication with the Weavers before the snipers opened fire. Instead, the FBI, nearly ignorant of the facts, adopted the position of the marshals that the Weavers were fanatics who would kill any federal officer who came in contact with them, their own children and themselves as well, that none would surrender unless Vicki surrendered, and that this was a continuing firefight. That's from Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 14, Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 14. And folks, you notice that they're assigning to Vicki Weaver the same role that they assigned to David Koresh in the Waco Massacre. Now the snipers established their own strategies to kill all of the adults. They decided that if any adult came out of the house, they would await until all of the adults came out before opening fire. That way, they could kill them all. And that's exactly straight out of the 9/17/92 Horiuchi Grand Jury Testimony, page 72, out of their own mouth. Toward the evening of August 22, 1992, Sarah, the 16-year-old, accompanied by Randy and Kevin Harris, decided to have one last look at Sammy before he was buried. They walked out the front door of the house, headed toward the birthing shed. This is from Weaver's Harris statement, page 2 back. Across the way, Sierra 4, an expert sniper team consisting of Lon Horiuchi and Dale Monroe, were set up at about 200 yards. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 61. Horiuchi said he saw the three come out of the house. He did not realize that the female was Sarah. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 55. But Horiuchi said he saw no rifle in the female's hands. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 33. He was zeroed in on Harris, whom he says he recognized from his size, although the snipers had also been provided pictures of all three adults. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 38. Weaver could not possibly be confused for Harris if the officers were, indeed, attempting to discriminate between the parties rather than setting out to kill them all. The two were not dressed alike, did not look alike, were years apart in age, and Harris was over a foot taller than Weaver. Horiuchi, however, claims that even though he was observing through his 10-power scope at only 200 yards, he mistook Weaver for Harris. This sniper had such an accurate view of his target that he was able to see his own bullet splatter into the birthing house. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 50. It was, of course, Randy Weaver, not Harris, who stood at the door, his back to the sniper. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 49. As Randy reached up to open the door, Horiuchi fired. The bullet traversed through the soft flesh under his arm. When Horiuchi opened fire, all three ran toward the house. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 53. Horiuchi says he followed Harris in his scope, that Harris was bringing up the rear. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 54. Horiuchi omits saying anything about seeing Vicky, who was standing at the door with her baby in her arms. Weaver-Harris statement, page 2, back 3. The door had a window in it, and Vicky would have been clearly visible through Horiuchi's 10-power scope. Horiuchi now claims he shot Vicky by mistake. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 70. But the wounds on Vicky show that the bullet entered Vicky's head first, at the cheek, went through the mouth and tongue, blew through the jawbone, cut the carotid artery. 8/31/92 autopsy report on Vicky Weaver. And if indeed the same bullet hit Kevin Harris, it hit him secondarily. Vicky screamed and continued to scream. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 61, until within minutes she bled to death in a kneeling position at the floor. She died with the baby still in her arms. From the Weaver's Harris statement, page 3. You'll have to forgive me, folks, because this affects me emotionally, and it's very difficult to read this and maintain any kind of a composure. Harris suffered massive wounds in the arm and wounds into his chest cavity. The number of shots fired is in serious question. Horiuchi claims he fired only twice, and that the third shot heard by other snipers might have been an echo. 9/17/92 Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 63. As to the killing of Vicky, Horiuchi seemingly believed that Sarah was Vicky. When Sarah ran into the house, so far as Horiuchi was concerned, it was Vicky running into the house. When Vicky stood holding the door open, her head in plain sight, he shot Vicky, who was an easy, standing target. The FBI now faced a serious problem. They had killed an unarmed mother standing at the door with her baby in her arms. They had no warrant for Vicky and were not likely to ever get one. 9/30/92 Rogers grand jury testimony, page 30. Moreover, the FBI had discovered that Vicky had not been involved in the shooting at the Y. 9/30/92 Rogers grand jury testimony, page 30. It appears, therefore, that after Vicky was shot, the officers realized they had no legal or moral justification for having killed Vicky. Good night, folks, and God bless you all. Across America and around the world, once again, you're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper for Swiss America Trading. We went without a sponsor for many, many months in the early days of this program, The Hour of the Time. One of the reasons was we did not want to take anyone on as a sponsor who would try to manipulate us and tell us what we could say or what we could not say during this program. We also wanted to make sure that if we ever took a sponsor, which we eventually did, the first one was the Pilot Connection Society, and the second one was Backwoods Home Magazine. We wanted to make sure that if we did, it would be a product, a sponsor, a company, a person that we ourselves believed in, a product that we ourselves would use, and that we could wholeheartedly recommend to the listening audience. We were very lucky, folks, to have found Swiss America Trading. As you know, when WWCR was burned to the ground, an act of sabotage, we didn't know where to go. We didn't know if we would ever get back on the air. We did not know if WWCR would be rebuilt and would begin broadcasting again. I had no idea how to look for another station because I never was a radio personality, and still probably am not. I'm an information broker. I'm pretty proud of the organization that I built up. I'm proud of this radio show. And I'm proud of all the people who have helped make it possible and make it work, and one of those people are the folks at Swiss America Trading. Specifically, Craig Smith. Now, I want you to understand that this just is not some corporation out there. This is a corporation made up of people just like you and I. They care about this country, they care about the Constitution, they care about God, they care about the hour of the time. Now, instead of abandoning us like most sponsors would when WWCR was burned, Swiss America Trading went right to work finding us another place to broadcast. And within just a matter of hours, a new station, this station, WRNO, was found, thus making it possible for this program to continue to broadcast the truth to the world. The people at Swiss America Trading, folks, stand behind the hour of the time. And I want you to stand behind them. If you have not called them yet, please pick up the phone right now and do it. Swiss America Trading deals in protecting you through non-confiscatable, non-reportable hard assets. They have the kind of investments that I've recommended on this show many times. They have investments that I don't recommend. They have investments that I don't know anything about. But it's your decision what you do with your money. They have anything that you could possibly dream of to protect yourself from what's coming in the future, and specifically those means of protecting your assets that we have outlined in previous broadcasts of the hour of the time. So call Swiss America Trading right now. It doesn't cost you a thing, and you're going to get a free newsletter in the process that's chock full of information that you need to know. You've heard me inform you about the trouble this country is in, both politically and financially. And the time, folks, to act is now. Time is running out. Look around you, read the paper, listen to the news. Now, if you can't figure that out without somebody having to tell you, maybe you better not call. But for those of you who do understand it, call now. The time to act is now. Don't wait until it's too late. Call the experts at Swiss America Trading at 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646, and have them show you how to protect yourself. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. And mention my name, William Cooper, and they'll send you a free newsletter on protecting your future. And folks, by protecting your future, you're keeping the future of this program and freedom for the world alive. Call today. Call now. 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. And you'll be glad that you did.
In the the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho. Eagles gathered there together, guard the truth so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock, marked the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bright and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed, drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise left the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals, and FBI men stormed the hill, all on false, fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, they're the hosts of heavenly angels hovering near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, we are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is.
Wheresoever Eagles Gather, the Ballad of Randy Weaver. Lyrics and music by Carl Klang. Folks, if you'd like to have a copy of that song and the other one by Carl Klang called Paper Money, send $6 postpaid. That's $6 postpaid to Carl Klang. Last name spelled K-L-A-N-G. Carl Klang, Post Office Box 217. That's Post Office Box 217. Colton, Oregon. Colton, Oregon. 97017. That's 97017, United States of America, USA. That's $6 postpaid to Carl Klang, P.O. Box 217, Colton, Oregon 97017. That's $6, folks. Includes postage and handling, and you'll get the song Wheresoever Eagles Gather, the Ballad of Randy Weaver, and another song, Paper Money, lyrics and music by Carl Klang. Now there's a couple of other things that we need to cover, folks. Stan is retiring for the last time and will not be working with us anymore. So please don't bother Stan and Elma by calling them on their phone unless you want to wish them well and tell them goodbye and you've made friends with them over the period of time that we've been together. If not, please do not call the number that you've been using to ask for information or get an information packet or talk to a representative. We're in the process of getting a new number together that you will be able to call. The Post Office Box 3299 in Camp Verde, Arizona is still good. I'll give you that address right now. It's William Cooper, Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. That's William Cooper, Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. Once again, William Cooper, Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. Now, for those of you who don't understand what Camp Verde is, and believe me, the first time I heard it, I didn't either. Camp is spelled C-A-M-P, just like camping out, and Verde is spelled V as in Victor, E-R-D-E. It's Spanish, and it means green. So you can still use that address, folks, for a short time. Now, I highly recommend that if you want to survive what's coming in the future, if you want to understand what's happening to us and why, order my book, Behold a Pale Horse. The title is Behold a Pale Horse, folks. It's 500 pages of the most well-documented, most suppressed information ever printed in any one book in the entire history of the world. And that's been stated by experts. Don't take my word for it. Order the book. It's guaranteed. If you get that book, look through it right then. If you don't agree that you need that information and it's going to help you and it's worth the money that you paid for it, send it right back to us and we'll refund your money with no questions asked. The only thing that we ask is you send the book back in brand new condition just like you received it. If it's been read, if the pages have been turned down, if the cover has been broken back, we will not honor the guarantee. So make sure that you understand the terms. Look through the book when you get it. If you don't agree that it's worth the money that you paid for it, send it right back and we'll refund your money, no questions asked. The price of the book for CAGI members is $20 plus $5 postage and handling. For non-CAGI members, if you're not a member of CAGI, it's $25 plus $5 postage and handling. Now, this is a heavy book. It's a big book. It's 500 pages. I am not self-published. I do not determine the price of the book nor the price of shipping. That's determined by the shipper. We use UPS and we always insure whatever we send out. The cost is high for this book, believe me. Also, the price from the publisher is $25. We've reduced it $5 for CAGI members. Now, since I'm not self-published, folks, I have to buy the book from the publisher just like any bookstore. So we're taking a loss on the CAGI members when we sell it to them at $20, but the CAGI members are the people who are doing the work, digging out the information, and that's why we give them a break on everything that we do. For instance, stereo copies put together on a digital mixer of The Hour of the Time are available. Each episode of The Hour of the Time is available if you would like to order it from us. And the price for CAGI members is $5 plus $2.50 postage and handling. So it's $7.50 altogether. For CAGI members, $5 plus $2.50 postage and handling. For anybody else, if you're not a CAGI member, it's $15 plus $2.50 postage and handling for a total of $17.50 per hour of The Hour of the Time. Now, we're trying to order a machine that will enable us to make the copies much faster, and if we're able to do that, we'll be able to drop the price even further for non-members, for non-CAGI members. For CAGI members, I don't know if we're going to be able to go much below $5, but we're going to try. So stick with us, folks, and remember that every episode of The Hour of the Time is available. You can order these tapes And they're on TDK 60-minute tapes. They're good quality tapes. They're not these white tapes with the flimsy stuff that breaks in about 2 weeks. These are good quality TDK tapes. The program is put together on a digital mixer. It's in stereo. All the music is beautiful stereo. We use only the best CDs for the music on this show. And if you've noticed, only the best music. Now, some of you older folks don't like some of this music, but everything that we use on the show has a message, and that's why we use it. And you know what? If you just like one certain kind of music and you're not willing to listen to the other kinds of music, I suggest that you watch a few episodes of Archie Bunker and see if you're looking at yourself in the mirror. Otherwise, hold on to your hat, folks, because it's going to be a rocky ride. Well, let's get into the program now, and we're going to start where we left off. And we left off under terrible circumstances in a cabin near a place called Ruby Ridge in the state of Idaho with a dead 13-year-old boy in the birthing shack, a dead mother, Vicki Weaver, lying in a pool of blood in their cabin, 2 men wounded, and several children, including an 8-month-old baby, probably scarred psychologically for the rest of their lives. Surrounded by over 400 agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, United States Marshals, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, teams from the Special Operations Division of the Department of Defense called Delta, and probably more. The FBI now faced a serious problem. They had killed an unarmed mother standing at the door with her baby in her arms. They had no warrant for Vicki and were not likely to get one. From the 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 30. Moreover, the FBI had discovered that Vicki had not been involved in the shooting at the Y. 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 30. It appears, therefore, that after Vicki was shot, the officers realized they had no legal or moral justification for having killed Vicki. Rogers reluctantly admitted to the grand jury, quote, "But apparently there wasn't enough evidence at that point to link her directly with the killing of Marshall Deegan," unquote. 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 30. Since they had no right to shoot her, the FBI had no alternative but to later claim her death was an accident. In the meantime, the federal officers pretended they did not know they had killed a second member of the Weaver family. As for Harris, the FBI told the press that they had shot at Harris because Harris was preparing to shoot a helicopter. That's from Bonner's Ferry Herald, an article entitled Clues at Weaver Cabin by Mike Wayland. But the helicopter pilot himself testified he stayed well out of range of rifle fire when he flew in the vicinity. From the 9/17/92 Costanza Grand Jury Testimony, pages 26, 27, and 39. When Horiuchi claims he was shooting Harris to save the helicopter, he faces 8 other snipers who apparently did not feel that the helicopter was jeopardized, for only Horiuchi admits to the shooting. Moreover, Horiuchi admits he does not know where the helicopter was when he opened fire. 9/17/92 Horiuchi Grand Jury Testimony, page 36 and 47. Nor does he explain how the helicopter could possibly be in danger while Harris and the others were running back to the house to escape for their lives. Unless the rules of engagement were indeed illegal, Horiuchi needed no excuse for having shot at Harris. It will be remembered that the rules of engagement permitted the snipers, indeed commanded them, to shoot on sight any adult male with a weapon, and Harris was armed. The rules were said to contemplate an ongoing firefight. 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 15. So the FBI could argue that killing an armed subject on sight would be justified. But by the time the witnesses appeared before the grand jury, the FBI had apparently abandoned the rules of engagement as the basis for their action and now attempted to make their shooting comport to the law, namely that the shootings had been necessitated to protect innocent persons in imminent danger. Despite the fact that Weaver's back was to the sniper, and presumably to the helicopter behind him, Horiuchi claimed in his testimony to the grand jury, quote, "At this time, I decided I needed to shoot that individual to protect the individuals in the helicopter," unquote. 9/17/92, Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 48. Later, he was to claim that when he shot at Harris while Harris was running, that the person in the helicopter is in danger. 9/17/92, Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 54. Indeed, not a single shot was ever fired by anyone from the Weaver residence. 9/30/92, Rogers grand jury testimony, pages 60 and 61. In his testimony to the grand jury, Horiuchi further abandoned the rules of engagement and sought to establish another legally justifiable reason why he might have shot at Harris and hit Vicky. He suggested that perhaps the armored personnel carriers were on their way up, and that when the back door of the carrier drops open, the Weavers might have been able to shoot into the back door of the carriers. 9/17/92, Horiuchi grand jury testimony, page 51. The carriers were not present at the time of the shooting. They did not arrive there until the next day, and of course, no one shot at them. In the meantime, the press was told that Harris actually did shoot at a helicopter from the front porch of the house, that a, quote, perimeter guard took aim and fired from approximately 300 yards away, unquote, and that Harris disappeared into the house. This is from an article from the Bonners Ferry Herald entitled Clues at Weaver Cabin by Mike Wayland. Federal authorities further told the press that the reason Vicky had been shot was because she too had fired on the helicopter. Article, report, Vicky Weaver was shot after family fired on helicopter, from the Associated Press wire. After Vicky was shot, Senior Agent in Charge Glenn went so far as to log the fact that the FBI helicopter had drawn fire from within the house, and that thereafter shots were exchanged between the snipers and the subjects in the house. That's from the FBI log for 8/21/92 at 21:12 hours. These stories, folks, are now admittedly false. Indeed, Commander Richard Rogers himself told the grand jury that, quote, the shots that Lon Horiuchi took about 6 p.m. on the 22nd were the last shots that I'm aware of that were fired up there, unquote. 9/30/92, Rogers grand jury testimony, page 60. It is informative to note at this juncture that Horiuchi, an expert marksman and team leader, armed with a precision sniping weapon with a 10-power scope, now claims that both of his shots hit persons he did not intend to hit. Some sniper, wouldn't you say? Vicky's death was now supposedly accidental, and Randy Weaver was supposedly shot when Horiuchi accidentally mistook Weaver for Harris. Harris, too, was supposedly hit with fragments of the bullet that went through Vicky's head and struck Harris in the arm and lungs. Sammy's death was also attributable to accident. By the time the officers were called to the grand jury, every person shot or killed had been shot by accident. You know what I say to that, folks? Bullshit. In the meantime, the FBI acted as if Vicky were alive. They brought up their expert negotiator, accompanied with a psychiatrist. The FBI claimed that although they made 2 attempts to attach microphones to the house as well as a closed-circuit television, that both mics failed and the television equipment was not operative. Lansley grand jury testimony, page 40. Although the FBI told the New York Times that they were using listening devices that allowed them to hear conversations and even the baby's cries in the cabin, This is from the New York Times, August 26, 1992. In the meantime, Randy Weaver was hollering to the FBI that his wife was dead, but the FBI continued to speak to her as if she were alive. From the standpoint of the people inside the Weaver house, they were being fired upon by unidentified assailants without cause. These assailants had killed Vicky before their very eyes, including the eyes of the surviving children, one a girl of only 10 years of age. Commander Rogers recognized this fact. Quote, "It was obvious to the people inside the cabin that they had people around them, our sniper observers. Of course, I assume they didn't know who they were, but they knew someone was out there." Unquote. From the 9/30/92 Rogers Grand Jury Testimony, page 47. Next, the FBI placed a shotgun-carrying robot on the porch of the little house, Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 53, and then wondered why Randy wouldn't pick up the phone to talk to them. The negotiator, claiming he had trained thousands of officers, Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 4, treated Randy Weaver as a paranoid personality, Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 86. From the testimony, Lansley, and I think that's what Randall was, along with this paranoid ideation, he was extremely irritable, saw people plotting against him. From the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 87. But it was the FBI itself who thought Randy's sister, who the FBI had asked to help, might encourage Randy to kill himself and the children. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, pages 22 through 24. And the FBI had, quote, "real questions about Bo Gritz," unquote, and folks, so do I and many other patriots. Believe me, Gritz is dirty, and we're going to get to the bottom of that on another episode of the Hour of the Time. That's from the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 34, who later accomplished what the FBI could not, the surrender of both Weaver and Harris. During all of this time, the FBI continued to claim that it did not know that Vicky was dead. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 37. In the meantime, Vicky's unprepared body had remained in the cabin for over a week. Some of the snipers reported they could detect an unpleasant odor emanating from the house. That's from the FBI log, page 45. And during all of this time, the federal negotiator, claiming he was ignorant of Vicky's death, continued to taunt Randy Weaver and the children by asking questions about Vicky and directing questions to the dead Vicky about her baby. Sometimes they said things like, quote, "Good morning, Mrs. Weaver. We had pancakes for breakfast. What did you have?" unquote. The baby was often awake and crying for its mother's milk. That's from Sarah Weaver to the Des Moines, Iowa Register, September 13, 1992. The FBI, steadfast in its position that the Weavers were dangerous, never left the armored personnel carriers when near the Weaver house. Yet others were able to approach the house, including a preacher who had never met Randy. Bo Gritz and Jack McLean both made several trips to the house and talked to Weaver and Harris. That's from the FBI log, page 45. Although neither had known them before that date, and that's important, folks, because in speeches and talks and radio interviews, Gritz had claimed to know Weaver. And Gritz had talked about Weaver as early as late 1989, and talked about him again at Freedom Call 90 in Las Vegas in July of 1990, which I attended and witnessed. He stated that he had received a letter from Randy Weaver, a man who had served in Vietnam with him, a good trooper, as he termed it, a good soldier, who was in danger of having his whole family wiped out by the federal government. Don't go away, folks. It's time to take our break. I'll be right back after this very short pause. Up to the cabin and talk. Folks, this is William Cooper speaking to you for Swiss America Trading. Now, if you have not yet called Swiss America Trading and told them that you listen to the Hour of the Time with William Cooper to receive your free newsletter, do it now. Do it now. So many people ask me when I travel around the country, how can I save my assets? I also get that question in a great percentage of the mail that we receive here. How can I protect my assets from what's coming in this economic collapse that we're expecting? Well, folks, Swiss America Trading has many of the answers. They have many of the investments that we have recommended on this show. Call them, 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Tell them that William Cooper sent you, and they'll send you a newsletter chock full of information that you need to know. You'll be glad that you did. Call now, 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Let the experts at Swiss America Trading help you help yourself. Call now, 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. And believe me, you'll be glad that you did. When at last Bo Greitz simply walked up to the cabin and talked to Randy, Randy told Greitz that Vicky was dead. From the FBI log, page 45. And when thereafter the FBI could no longer claim ignorance concerning her death, the negotiator next took the position that although Vicky had been the, quote, real strong person, unquote, upon her death, Sarah, the 16-year-old, had taken her place. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 55. The negotiator said, quote, but at this stage of the game, once again, the children are deciding what's going to happen next. Sarah wasn't buying it. She didn't want to come out, unquote. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 56. At the same time, Gene Glenn, the chief of operations for the FBI, told the press that the children, quote, were considered hostages, unquote, from the New York Times, August 26, 1992, while privately the FBI admitted that, quote, this is being viewed as a crisis intervention as opposed to hostage negotiations, unquote, from the FBI log, page 18. Both Weaver and Harris, the latter gravely wounded and near death, eventually surrendered as a result of the efforts of Bo Greitz and Jack McLamb. However, the FBI negotiator took credit for the work of Greitz and McLamb by claiming he had, quote, trained Greitz on the spot, unquote, and that Greitz did everything the negotiator said to do or to say. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 33. During the time of the standoff, there was an operational headquarters, a command post that was occupied by the various agents in charge, team captains, negotiators, and others, including the chief of the operation, Gene Glenn, who, in these war games, they referred to as, quote, the Allied Supreme Commander, unquote. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 63. Also at that post during the negotiations was Assistant United States Attorney Ron Hallen, who authored the indictment in this case, its several amendments, and who prosecutes this case. Mr. Hallen was at the command post at various relevant times during the siege. Reference is made in the FBI log to his involvement at the command post on 7 separate occasions. Moreover, Hallen went with the officers to the Y, where he witnessed the search for and the recovery of evidence. From the FBI log, page 16. As a witness, he would have been privy to many of the conversations that occurred at the command post and elsewhere between Glenn, the other special agents in charge, Richard Rogers, the commander who briefed the snipers, senior agent in charge Robin Montgomery from Portland, team leaders Hazen and McGavin, who directed the snipers, and others. He must have known what rules of engagement were in place. The United States Attorney's Office authored a note that was sent into the Weaver home during the siege. It was signed by Ron Hallen. From Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 65. Further, Mr. Hallen has made himself a witness by offering unsworn testimony on various matters to the grand jury, some examples of which are as follows. Grand Juror. How does Randy Weaver fit into this? Is he a member of these groups, these orders? Howen. I don't say that Randy Weaver was a member of the order. He was not a member of Order 2. He wasn't a member of the last group that came out in 1982. There is circumstantial evidence to believe that he intended to use his family as the group and Kevin Harris. From Byerly Grand Jury Testimony, pages 42 and 43. On another occasion, Howen testified to the grand jury as follows. Howen. Well, certainly that concern is something I think every one of us would share in that kind of situation and would certainly understand the difficult circumstances of the situations you were under. And I think we can appreciate how badly we feel about addressing Vicki for 5 or 6 days when she is not even alive. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 73. He went on to testify. Howen. That's something you would screen as a negotiator, because you wouldn't want it to inflame him or cause him to start killing people inside the house if he gets into a murder, I think as you quoted before, a homicide-suicide type situation, which I think was your worst nightmare. From the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 74. With the witness, Lansley, still in the stand, Mr. Howen then testifies to the grand jury as an expert as to how Vicki was shot. Howen. And I think there is fair evidence before you that she is not standing up tall, perhaps holding a baby in her arms, looking out the door, that if she is shot and the door is open, then it's consistent with her crouching down in the doorway. Howen. At this time, there is circumstantial evidence to believe she, Vicki, was killed as Kevin Harris is entering the door by a second shot fired by a sniper, and again, as you have seen the door and the location of it, I believe it's a fair conclusion, and you have to make your own mind up, of course. She was not standing upright, but must have been crouched over a little bit. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 100. He testified to the grand jury about the listening devices utilized by the FBI and asked for confirmation of his testimony to that effect by the witness, Lansley. Howen. Special Agent Lansley, even though you couldn't hear it, didn't we have a device attached to the house so we could hear what was going on inside the house? I authorized the order. Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 39. Howen. Did we not also obtain an order from a district judge to install a CCTV in that house, penetrate the skin of that house? Lansley. I don't know. From the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 40. He testified to the frustration that all of the decision makers were having at the command post. Howen. It was the frustration of all of us down at the command post is to not have access to that, tapes, and access information as well. So we shared that with you. From the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 41. Still another time, Howen testifies. Howen. There is a woman who, from my position down the hill, but I recall a woman by the name of Jackie Brown making trips up and down there. She had clothing, food, things for the baby. From the Lansley Grand Jury Testimony, page 57. During the testimony of Byerly, Howen transforms the fiction of Hollywood into reality for the grand jury. His testimony deals with the sawed-off guns that Weaver supposedly sold to the undercover agent. Howen. If any of you saw the movie, quote, The Terminator, unquote, remember the first few scenes where the shotgun is under the coat, under a long coat? It's on a string. Those are the things that cannot been seen. Those of you that have seen it, fine. Those that haven't, the foreman finally interrupts him. That's from the Byerly Grand Jury Testimony, page 18. Faced with this prosecutorial nightmare of wrongdoing by federal agents, the Assistant United States Attorney, Ron Howen, himself a participant, himself a witness, now sought to manipulate the case in such a manner as to center the case on the religious beliefs of the Weavers, beliefs he knew were unpopular with mainstream America, beliefs he knew would prejudice the defendants before a jury and cause the jury to focus on such beliefs rather than the wrongful acts of the officers. And that's exactly the same thing they did in the Waco massacre. To accomplish this, Howen set out to convince the grand jury that the Weavers and Harris, as a family, were equivalent to the criminal element in the Aryan nations. Howen intentionally attempts, and we think successfully, to prejudice the grand jury against Weaver and Harris. He does so by guiding an FBI agent, one James Davis, through a long, bloody narrative concerning the heinous crimes committed by The Order, a group he admits these defendants did not belong to. He subjected the grand jury to many pages of testimony by one Herb Byerly, an agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Treasury Department, in which another set of horrid crimes by The Order were described in detail. Now, for those of you who don't know what The Order is, it was really called the Sons of Liberty. It was a patriotic group that became persecuted and hunted by the federal government with the intent to destroy and kill every single one of them. And finally, they turned to criminal activities for their survival. Criminal activities are not legal, are not right, are not lawful. They are not condoned by me or any other patriot in this country. And therefore, they deserve to be apprehended, tried, and convicted. Instead, what happened was the same thing, folks, that happened in Waco, Texas. Burned to death. No one, folks, no one could hear the dreadful details of these horrors without hating and fearing the group of terrorists, murderers, and butchers who were responsible for them. For the court to fully understand the extent to which Howen went in manipulating and prejudicing the grand jury and destroying their independence, we believe it necessary that every word of these pages from Davis's and Byerly's testimony be read. For as the court can determine for himself, this testimony was so egregious, so vile, so invidious, so calculated to prejudice the grand jury against these defendants, and so uncalled for and unconnected in any genuine way to these defendants that the entire indictment must be deemed infected, obtained as it was, through inexcusable prejudice, and dismissed. We believe when the court reads this testimony, it will agree that in the court's entire life as a lawyer and a judge, the court has never seen or heard of a prosecutor who took such advantage of his office and in such a way utterly disregarded all boundaries of propriety, abandoned his duty to administer justice, refused to be governed by rules of fair play, and used his power to supplant truth with prejudice. In short, the presentation of the Davis and Byerly testimony was so flagrant and egregious as to infringe on the grand jury's ability to exercise its independent judgment in the charging decision and destroyed the integrity of the grand jury process. We turn to these pages of Davis's testimony to summarize. Howen admits that Harris and Weaver have no contact with and are not linked to the Aryan nations. Davis Grand Jury Testimony, pages 35 and 36. Despite this admission, he leads Davis through over 30 pages of testimony that begins by tying in the Aryan nations to the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, and other hated groups. Howen then leads the witness through a host of crimes that those who are associated with the Aryan nations have committed. He has Davis tell how Bob Matthews robbed a bank in Spokane and how they began to make counterfeit money. Their goal was to, quote, mess up the economy, unquote, because Jews governed the economy. That's from the Davis Grand Jury Testimony, page 42. They wanted to spread their money into minority communities so that minorities, presumably blacks, would be arrested. It's from the Davis grand jury testimony, page 42. Cowan then had the witness, Davis, tell the grand jury about a book written by William Pierce, who heads a white supremacist organization called the National Alliance. The book was called The Turner Diaries. Davis provides pages of testimony about the content of this book, obviously a novel, without connecting it in any way with Harris or Weaver. Quote, the bottom line of this book is that Turner, the hero, goes on a mission to establish a white government in the United States. At some point in the book, they get so much money and such a large army that they are able to take on the American government. In the book, they were able to obtain a nuclear weapon, and they were able to destroy the country of Israel. And in the book, Turner's last mission, in which he self-destructs, is to blow up the Pentagon. Unquote. That's from the Davis grand jury testimony, page 43. Davis now describes how the order turned to armored car robberies, one in Seattle for $500,000, followed by one in Ukiah, California for $3.6 million. He tells how the members of the Aryan nations bought a large tract of land and began to do military training. He describes their supplies. Quote, trailers full of army supplies, bedrolls, boots, you know, enough stuff to equip a large number of men, unquote. Davis grand jury testimony, page 45. He tells the grand jury that Bob Matthews went to Philadelphia and recruited members of the Nazi Party, and then he went south and recruited members of the Ku Klux Klan. Bringing the danger of this all home to the grand jury in response to Howen's questions, Davis tells how there was a Boise Command Center manned 24 hours a day. From the Davis grand jury testimony, page 46. Next, Howen leads the witness into what he calls Step 5. Quote, the subject of it was assassination of anybody they considered to be an enemy of the organization. Unquote. Davis gives names and tells the grand jury that these people committed 3 murders. The first was of a heavy drinker named Walter West. Davis then tells how the murderers took West out into the woods where they had already dug a grave to bury him. Someone by the name of Kemp was to be the executioner. Kemp hits the man in the head with a hammer, but that doesn't kill him. So with West on the ground yelling at him, Dewey picks up a gun and shoots him in the head, and then they bury him. From the Davis grand jury testimony, page 48. This wasn't enough. Davis next tells the grand jury, quote, I can't overemphasize their bitterness, and this is true of most of the white supremacy groups toward the Jews, unquote. Davis grand jury testimony, page 48. Now he goes into the details of the Alan Berg murder, how Berg, the radio talk show host, was followed by the mother of Matthew's girlfriend, and how Bruce Pierce walked up and killed him. 22 shots were fired. From the Davis grand jury testimony, page 50. After lunch, Howen again reminds the grand jury that this organization does indeed have a message center in Boise and only 5 or 6 blocks away from where the jurors were sitting, and that several of these people lived in town. Davis grand jury testimony, pages 51 and 52. Davis tells how this group forged passports and birth certificates, and how they took the name of a dead child and used the name of the dead child for creating new identifications. After that, he tells the jury about another Brinks job in San Francisco. Then he describes in detail how the Ukiah job was pulled off. I might tell you as an aside, folks, that the United States government, the intelligence agencies, and other undercover agencies of police departments, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do the same thing, take on identities of dead children for their cover. They can get real birth certificates, real identification, and this cannot be detected unless you personally know that this child is dead. Davis, they had a couple pickups. They pulled up in front of the pickup, held up a sign, quote, get out or you will die, unquote. The people in the armored car did not get out quickly, so they sprayed it with automatic weapons fire. That got them all out. Then they started unloading money out of the back end and putting it into the back of their pickup. One of the men, and this is Robert Matthews, who is the leader, as he was unloading money, left his handgun sitting in the armored car, so when they all fled, there's a gun left behind, unquote. This was allegedly how they traced Matthews to the robbery. Now Davis tells the grand jury how counterfeit bills were being made in Boise and how the police caught a man passing them in Philadelphia. He tells how the people with the Secret Service and the ATF get together and figured out the case of the armed robbery, how the arrests of these people were conducted, how Matthews died in the shootout. That's not true, folks. Matthews died, he burned to death in a house when they set it on fire. They also talk about how they tied the bullets, recovered after the arrest, to the bullets that killed Berg. The story goes on and on. Yarborough, one of the members, tries to jump out of a second-story building. Davis grand jury testimony, page 61. After testifying for parts of 2 days, the climax to the story was rendered by the witness. Davis, once or twice in there, shot at some agents as they tried to get in a little closer and that type of thing, and on December the 8th, Matthews just opened fire and died subsequently in a gun battle with the agents that were there. After that, do you want me to keep going? From the Davis grand jury testimony, page 62. Actually, Matthews died in a fire. Now, I don't condone the illegal acts of any of these people, folks, but I want you to know the truth. And we're out of time for tonight. We will continue to the conclusion, I hope, tomorrow night, if not, the next night. Good night, and God bless each and every single one of you.
In the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho, eagles gathered there together to guard the truth, so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock to mark the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bright and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise let the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals, and FBI men stormed the hill, all on false, fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, there's a host of heavenly angels hovering near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver. We are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is.
You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. Folks, if you haven't called Swiss America Trading, our sponsor, do it right now. Many of you have called and asked how you can save your assets from the coming economic trauma. Many of you have asked me the same question in my travels across this country. Many of you have written long letters expressing your concern for all that you worked for your family. How are you going to take care of them if you lose everything in the coming economic collapse? Well, folks, Swiss America Trading can help you with some of those problems. They have available many of the investments that we have recommended right here on this program. It doesn't cost you a thing to call. Look into it. No one is going to come and beat on your door, and no one's going to twist your arm to do anything that you don't want to do. In fact, you're going to get something from it. You're going to get a newsletter free of charge that contains a lot of information that you need to know. Everyone who has called Swiss America Trading and has received this newsletter full of information, or has invested money in some of the investments that are available through Swiss America Trading, have expressed to me that they have been treated kindly, that they are satisfied with the information that they got, in fact, very happy with the information that they got, and are very satisfied with the investments that they have made. In fact, they have expressed their sincere thanks to Swiss America Trading for sponsoring this program. I'm sure you understand, folks, that without the sponsorship of Swiss America Trading, we probably would not be on the air tonight. So call Swiss America Trading right now at 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Ask the experts there how you can protect yourself in the coming economic trauma. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Don't forget to mention my name, folks, William Cooper, and they'll send you that free newsletter and a packet of information that you'll be very happy with. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. You'll be glad that you did. Wheresoever eagles gather, the Ballad of Ruby Ridge, or the Ballad of Randy Weaver, however you want to term it, is available to you on cassette, folks. Tape cassette. $6. That includes postage and handling. $6 postpaid to Carl Klang. Last name spelled K-L-A-N-G. Carl Klang. Post Office Box 217. That's P.O. Box 217. Colton, Oregon 97017, USA. That's Carl Klang. Post Office Box 217. Colton, Oregon 97017, USA. That's $6 United States currency postpaid in the United States from a foreign country. Might cost you a little more for postage. You can call and ask. The number is area code 503-824-3371. That's 503-824-3371. Now, folks, Stan Barrington is retiring for the second or third time. I'm not sure which. So please do not send any more mail or call Stan unless you're a longtime friend of his. You made friends with him over the years. Please don't bother Stan and his wife Elma anymore. The Camp Verde address, Post Office Box 3299, is still good. You can send your mail or your orders from my book or audio tapes of this radio show or any of our videotapes, or just to ask for an information packet. Send it to William Cooper, Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. That's Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. The book, for those of you who are interested, is 500 pages of the most well-documented, most suppressed information ever printed in one book in the history of the world. For CAGI members, it's still $20 plus $5 postage and handling. For anybody else, it's $25 plus $5 postage and handling, and you can send that to the address that I just gave you. If you'd like to join CAGI, the Citizens Agency for Joint Intelligence, which has many benefits, one of which you just heard, send $45 to that same address, $45. Or you can just write us and ask for an information packet. Now, for those of you who would like to leave messages for me or leave comments, please do not ask me to call you back, because we can't afford to do that. We just cannot afford to do that. You can leave a message on my Los Angeles hotline. The number is area code 310-281-8222. That's area code 310-281-8222. Once again, now that's my hotline in Los Angeles. You can call and leave a message for me if you'd like. Bear in mind, folks, when you leave your message that it might be aired on this program. Do not leave a message if you do not want it to be aired on this program. Okay? But you can leave any comments that you'd like to leave on that hotline. Please don't leave addresses or phone numbers for us to write or call you, because that is not what the hotline is for. It's to hear your comments. It's to hear what you have to say. And occasionally we air those comments on the hour of the time. Once again, the hotline is 310-281-8222. That's 310-281-8222. If you'd like to write us and ask for a packet of information, write to William Cooper, Post Office Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. That's P.O. Box 3299, Camp Verde, Arizona 86322. We're putting together a line where you'll be able to call and talk directly to me or one of my representatives, and I will announce that over the air when it is together, and also be in our upcoming newsletter. By the way, folks, the newsletter is going to spill the beans on the Waco massacre. It's the results of all of our investigations, and it's going to leave you absolutely incensed. You're going to be angry when you read that, and you're going to want to ask some congressmen and government officials some hard questions. One of the things that we've discovered, folks, is when they made the initial raid, and it was a raid, and they have admitted that it was a raid, a no-knock raid, they had no warrant. No warrant, folks. They did it without a warrant. Now, they had something that they are calling a warrant that they obtained on February the 25th or 26th, and it was signed by a magistrate. They knew when they got it that it was an illegal warrant, because a warrant must be signed by a district court judge. Understand that, folks. They knew their warrant was no good, and that's why they sealed it and would not allow the public to see it. They did not have a legal warrant until they obtained one on April the 13th, 1993. Post-crime, and we believe that the date April the 13th is false. We don't believe they got that warrant until after they cremated those people, burned them, incinerated them in the fire. But even if they did, it's still post-crime. It makes them all criminals, and that's exactly what they are anyway. It's time, folks, to continue with our ongoing series until we get through this of the memorandum in support of defendants' motions filed by G.L. Spence, Kent W. Spence of Spence, Moriarty, and Schuster, 15 South Jackson Street, Post Office Box 548, Jackson, Wyoming 83001, and Charles F. Peterson, Gary L. Gilman, of Orndorff, Peterson, Hawley, White, and Gilman, 1087 West River Street, Suite 230, Boise, Idaho, 83702, in the United States District Court for the District of Idaho, United States of America versus Randall C. Weaver and Kevin L. Harris, defendants. And this memorandum in support of defendants' motions to disqualify United States Attorney's Office, to dismiss the indictment, to strike prejudicial allegations, to order an evidentiary hearing for a continuance pending an investigation by the United States Attorney General and pending any interlocutory appeals by the parties. We've already had 2 episodes of this. If you're just tuning in, you need to order the tapes that began on Wednesday night, Wednesday, May the 5th, continued last night, May the 6th, then of course tonight we're continuing again until it's finished. We'll keep airing this. Tonight is May the 7th, and we're going to continue with the testimony to the grand jury of a man named Davis, a federal agent named Davis, who is trying to connect Randy Weaver and Kevin L. Harris with the Aryan Nations and another group called the Order. And of course they admitted to the grand jury that Randy Weaver didn't know any of these people, whether were not members of the Aryan Nation or the Order. And this is just, all this testimony is being given to prejudice the grand jury against Randy Weaver and Kevin L. Harris. So we continue now. Next, Davis tells the jury about a declaration of war against the United States by the Aryan Nations and about an oath the members took in order to join the Order, which if broken, quote, resulted in the offender being killed and his head removed from his body, unquote. A man, an FBI undercover agent, was hired to kill one Martinez, who presumably had broken with the Order. Davis describes how Martinez, who was to be killed, got with the FBI, and how the FBI created a head that looked so realistic that Martinez, quote, almost threw up when he saw the picture. It looked so much like him, unquote. Davis grand jury testimony, page 65. The picture was then shown to Cutler, the Aryan Nation's chief of security, who said, quote, well, that is good. The oath has been fulfilled, unquote. Next, they talk about the scars on the undercover agent Norris's face, scars he received from his service in Vietnam. Davis tells how Norris had a glass eye, and therefore he was able to represent himself as a hitman. Davis grand jury testimony, page 66. Finally, after over 30 pages of this inflammable stuff, Howland gets to the supposed connection. It is with Vicky, not either one of the defendants. Question. You had occasion in my office to take a look at the letter from Vicky Weaver with a quotation at the bottom and the name at the bottom, quote, Matthews, unquote. Answer, yes. Question. Now, do you recognize that language, and do you recognize the name Matthews, and if so, how? Answer. The language she used in this particular paragraph, Mr. Howland, is referring to is very similar to the language that Bob Matthews used when he wrote the Declaration of War, and she implies that this is from Matthews, something that Matthews had written, and she has underneath the paragraph the last name of Matthews, attributing the paragraph to him apparently. Question. At this time, though, have you been able to, in your own mind, identify precisely which document that would come from, if it does exist? Answer. No, I don't know which one it might have come from. Davis grand jury testimony, page 67. That was the connection, a piece of paper purportedly written by Vicky with an attribution to Matthews at the bottom. Of course, folks, Matthews was not identified. It's just the name Matthews. The paper is included with these papers. It is several paragraphs, some biblical quotes. Vicky Weaver's handwritten biblical quotes, folks. None of the officers seemed to know what the paper was, but the grand jury is led to the conclusion that the mere presence of the name Matthews on a piece of paper somehow connected these defendants to the horrors described by Davis for parts of 2 days and put these Aryan nations killers and thugs within 5 blocks of the grand jurors. Now, even before Davis's testimony, Howen had already presented Herb Byerly to the grand jury, who admittedly, without any connection to the defendants whatever, started right in on Order 1 and Order 2, which he said were called by their German names, Bruderschweigen 1 and Bruderschweigen 2. Byerly grand jury testimony, pages 10 and 11. Howen had Byerly tell the grand jury about Debbie and David Dorr, who, like the Weavers, lived in a remote rural residence. How the Dorrs recruited criminals being released from the penitentiaries. How associates of theirs were involved in bombings in Coeur d'Alene, and how the Secret Service was investigating their counterfeiting. Then he tells the jury that in 1986, a murder occurred. He goes into the details of the bombings. Byerly grand jury testimony, pages 34 and 35. One of a Catholic rectory with a pipe bomb. How this group bombed trucking companies, a restaurant, and how they arrested the Dorrs and found firearms, ammunition, survival supplies, and the like. Finally, a grand juror interrupts this rambling narrative of horror and crime to ask the obvious. Grand juror: how does Randy Weaver fit into this? Is he a member of these groups? These orders? Howen: I don't say that Randy Weaver was a member of the order. He was not a member of Order 2. He wasn't a member of the last group that came out in 1982. I intend to present an indictment that this is what Mr. Weaver was doing. He was trying to form his own group, and eventually did form his group, but he did it as a family unit, plus the addition of Mr. Harris. When I propose the indictment, I will suggest to you there is a circumstantial evidence to believe that he intended to use his family as the group and Kevin Harris. From the Byerly grand jury testimony, pages 42 and 43. Folks have to break out of this here and just make this comment. These people are insidious. They are insane. They're breaking every law that was ever written. They have no conception of what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is all about. They couldn't get Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris on anything else. They can't connect them to the group or to the Aryan nation. So they make up this fantastic story that Randy has formed his own group, which consists of his family. This is sickening. This makes me sick to read this, but you've got to hear it. It's just drips with lies and venom and just crap. And these are the people who are controlling our justice system. My God, what has this country come to? Well, let's continue. It is important to note that at no time during the testimony of either Byerly or Davis did the Assistant United States Attorney advise the grand jury that this testimony was purely hearsay, a story, no more, gathered from many sources. As will be shown later, this advice is required by case law. Howen then called Richard Butler, the head of the Aryan nations. Butler told the grand jury that he had met Randy Weaver once at an Aryan Nations summer conference. In the over 10 years Weaver had lived in the community, he had attended but one such conference. From the Butler grand jury testimony, page 18. Weaver, Butler said, had no relationship to Butler's church. From the Butler grand jury testimony, page 23. Butler never met Vicky, any of the children, or Kevin Harris. From the Butler grand jury testimony, page 20 and 22. Butler was never at the Weaver home. Having failed to make a connection between Weaver and Butler, Howland then simply went on to further prejudice the grand jury by tying Butler into the names of most of the criminals, murderers, robbers, and counterfeiters who had been identified by Davis and Byerly. This took nearly 70 pages of totally unrelated testimony, yet it left the impression that the case was about Randy Weaver, Kevin Harris, and this criminal element. As soon as it became apparent from the testimony of the marshals at Weaver's preliminary hearing that Weaver could not possibly be bound over, even on the charge of assault, Howland rushed to an indictment before the grand jury and then dismissed the preliminary hearing before Magistrate Williams himself could dismiss it. A motion seeking dismissal of the indictment on this ground is pending before the court. Now, by indictment, and with 2 superseding amendments, Howland developed his theory. As in nearly all important federal criminal cases nowadays, there was, of course, the ubiquitous conspiracy. But this time, the conspiracy went back nearly 10 years to 1983 when the Weavers decided to move to Idaho. The Assistant United States Attorney now contrived a new theory, one that held that the Weavers had moved to Idaho to establish a confrontation with federal officers and to kill them. Moving to Idaho to raise their family in a more wholesome and simple environment, one where they could educate their children themselves, where they could raise their own food, where they could worship as they pleased, now magically became a part of the conspiracy to assault and murder federal officers and to establish a violent confrontation with them 10 years later. This is from the second superseding indictment, page 2 and 3. Now the simple act of buying land and building their family home became a part of this ongoing conspiracy. Now, even the selection of the family home site on top of a small hill overlooking a peaceful valley became a part of the conspiracy to build a fortress in the furtherance of the conspiracy. My gosh, I had better move, folks, because I live on top of a hill. The prosecutor in the indictment itself launches an invidious and prejudicial attack by claiming that Randy and Vicki Weaver, along with Kevin Harris, intended, quote, to establish a group in opposition to the United States government, which they termed ZOG, Z-O-G, which means Zionist Occupation Government, or the New World Order, for the purpose of advancing their views of white or Aryan supremacy or separatism and the political, social, and economic ascendancy of persons of a white or Aryan ethnic background. Second superseding indictment, page 4. As we have seen, folks, this group, according to the prosecuting United States Attorney's own admission, was their own family. Where the religious beliefs of the defendants would have been protected from prosecution by this contrivance, the Assistant United States Attorney will seek to prejudice the jury by introducing evidence concerning the defendants' religious beliefs. By this contrivance, these defendants will be held up as white supremacists, as racists, as Nazis, as skinheads, and by this scheme the prosecutor will attempt to prejudice the trial jury as he indeed destroyed the independence of the grand jury, and these same tactics were performed in the Waco massacre. By this ruse, the defendants must not only defend themselves of the charge of murder, they must defend themselves of what to many is a worse charge, namely the charge of being a Nazi, a skinhead, a racist, and under this setup the conviction of innocent defendants is substantially guaranteed. When neighbors, being neighborly, helped the Weavers by bringing food and supplies, this becomes acts by the neighbors in furtherance of the supposed conspiracy. And this is found in the second superseding indictment, pages 4 and 5. When Vicki Weaver wrote a letter in which she made reference to the servant of the Queen of Babylon, a writing fully protected under the First Amendment, this writing too was in furtherance of the conspiracy. This can be found in the second superseding indictment, page 10. And of course, the killing of Dagan became a part of the conspiracy to forward the white Aryan supremacy beliefs of the defendants. The allegations concerning the supposed religious beliefs of the Weavers are in opposition to the facts known by the government. The government knows that Randy Weaver is not a white supremacist, and we proved this months ago on this show, The Hour of the Time. Lance Lee himself testified to the grand jury as follows. Lance Lee, quote, "He was just kind of a freelance white. He calls himself a separatist. Not, and he was, he really did not like being depicted as a white supremacist." That's from the Lance Lee grand jury testimony, page 80, Our Emphasis. Irrespective of what their beliefs may have been, it is the obvious contrivance of the government as conceived by Mr. Howland to take fully protected but unpopular religious beliefs and to convert them by allegation into an active conspiracy so that what was once protected under our Constitution is now the foundation for admissible and prejudicial evidence against the defendants. You people out there better wake up. You see, just by making you politically incorrect, they can get the popular acceptance of killing you or putting you in prison for the rest of your life. Don't go away, folks. We've got to take our break now. I'll be right back after this very short pause. Hello, this is William Cooper for Swiss America Trading. As you know, folks, a fire, WWCR, burned to the ground, sabotage, to try to shut us all up. A fire caused us to move. When our friends at Swiss America Trading heard about the fire, they didn't drop us like most sponsors would. They went right to work finding us another place to broadcast. Within just a matter of hours, a new station, this station, WRNO, was found, thus making it possible for this program, The Hour of the Time, to continue to get the truth out to the world. The people at Swiss America Trading stand behind this program, and I want you to stand behind them. You see, Swiss America Trading deals in protecting their clients through non-confiscatable, non-reportable hard assets. Now, you've heard me inform you about the trouble this country's in, both politically and financially. And the time to act is now. Now, folks, not when it's too late. Call the experts at Swiss America Trading at 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646, and have them show you how to protect yourself. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646, and mention my name, William Cooper, for a free newsletter on protecting your future. And by protecting your future, folks, you're keeping the future of this program and freedom for the world alive. Call today, 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646, and you'll be glad that you did.
In the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho, eagles gathered there together to guard the truth, so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock to mark the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bright and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise let the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals, and FBI men stormed the hill, all on false fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, there's a host of heavenly angels hover near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver. We are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is.
Irrespective of what the beliefs of Randy Weaver, his wife Vicki, Kevin Harris, and the Weaver family were, it is the obvious contrivance of the government as conceived by Mr. Howland to take fully protected but unpopular religious beliefs and to convert them by allegation into an active conspiracy so that what was once protected under our Constitution is now the foundation for admissible and prejudicial evidence against the defendants. But the most egregious conduct of the Assistant United States Attorney was to focus the case before the grand jury on the murders and crimes of Order 1 and 2 and to wrongfully associate the defendants with these groups. By such method, the defendants were smeared by the prosecution with the acts of a criminal organization the defendants admittedly did not belong to. The grand jury, lost in days of irrelevant and inflammatory hearsay testimony, indeed became no grand jury at all, but a mere charging device of the prosecution. By this contrivance, the government has been successful in setting the issues so that the trial jury's attention must, by necessity, be directed away from the government's own misconduct while the jury weighs hated religious beliefs chargeable to the defendants against their own. It leaves jurors in the obvious position to reason, quote, "So the government killed a couple of Nazis who were trying to set up another Bruderschweigen one. So what? They had it coming," unquote. Isn't that what they did in Waco, Texas? It creates a sort of good riddance attitude in jurors by which the unlawful killing of 3 human beings and the wounding of 2 others can be excused. In a case where the defense must pit the testimony of the defendants and their family against the federal officers, Howland has destroyed the credibility of the witnesses before they can take the stand in their own defense. Moreover, the government has incorporated into the indictment every conceivable wrongful act that may or may not have been committed by the Weavers since the day 10 years ago that they left Iowa. For instance, the government includes an alleged theft of pipe by the Weavers from their neighbors as an act in furtherance of the conspiracy. From the second superseding indictment, page 12. The government includes a letter allegedly written by the Weavers threatening the president as an act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Superseding indictment, page 9. It includes numerous other prejudicial allegations that would be inadmissible in any criminal case, but by alleging that such acts were in furtherance of a conspiracy, the government positions itself on paper to bring before the jury any otherwise irrelevant, unrelated, and prejudicial bad act ever allegedly committed by the defendants. Every prohibited bad act allegedly ever committed by any defendant can, by this device, be made a part of the indictment, and thus evidence otherwise inadmissible can be introduced to their prejudice. Under this indictment, the defendants must defend innocent acts as criminal acts. They must defend themselves for moving to Idaho, defend themselves for having a family, defend themselves for buying a home, defend themselves for building a house, defend themselves for the choice of building sites, defend themselves for the exercise of free speech, and defend themselves for whatever their religious or political beliefs might be. They must further defend themselves of alleged crimes that are irrelevant to the case, the allegation of stealing pipe from their neighbors and writing a threatening letter to the president, and other supposed bad acts which may be revealed when the government responds to the defendant's bill of particulars. As to the charge that Weaver threatened the president, the government's own documents establish that this allegation is false. Yet the defendants must now defend themselves against these allegations as well. The law. The prosecutor as a witness. On at least 2 occasions, the circuit court has told prosecutors that they may not make themselves witnesses and thereafter prosecute the case. In United States versus Tamura, 694 F. 2nd, 591, 601, 9th Circuit Court, 1982, the court said that an attorney should not testify at a trial where he is acting as a prosecutor. A defendant in a criminal case can call the prosecutor as a witness. In this regard, see also United States versus Pranzel, 764 F. 2nd, 548, 551, 9th Circuit Court, 1985. Mr. Howen is more than an evidentiary witness. Through his detailed and careful cross-examination, we can establish the efforts of the United States to cover the wrongs of their officers, including the attempts made by the United States to wrongfully associate these defendants with the Aryan nations and Orders 1 and 2. The government is no different than any other party to a case. If a party commits a wrong and attempts to cover it, the attempt of the party to cover it is evidence of its knowledge of the original wrong. And I might add, it's not included in this brief, is an indication of conspiracy on the part of the government. To continue, we also have the right to cross-examine Howen on the numerous pieces of evidence he gave to the grand jury during the indicting process. On misconduct before the grand jury, the controlling cases on grand jury misconduct are United States versus Machanik, 475 U.S. 66, 106, S. Supreme Court, 938-89, L.E.D. 2nd, 50, 1986, in Bank of Nova Scotia versus United States, 108, Supreme Court, 2369, 1988. Under Machanik, the trial jury's verdict rendered harmless any conceivable error in the charging decision, the grand jury's decision. Under Nova Scotia, Justice Kennedy held that the errors must prejudice the defendants. The standard of prejudice is one requiring dismissal, quote, if it is established that the violation substantially influenced the grand jury's decision to indict, unquote, or, quote, if there is grave doubt, unquote, that the decision to indict was free from substantial influence of such violations. The within indictment was proposed by a lawyer who was a participant with the government team at the so-called crime scene itself. He has a personal stake in the outcome of this case. Some of the decisions made at the scene where Vicky was killed and Kevin Harris and Randy Weaver were wounded were made at the command post that was occupied, at times, by this lawyer. He was on hand when the FBI conducted its investigation at the Y. He wrote a note that was delivered during the siege to Mr. Weaver. He testified as a witness to the grand jury on numerous matters. He was fully aware of the misconduct of the federal officers, as fully aware of that misconduct as we. For our information came from the government itself. As a participant from beginning to end, his personal stake was to see that the federal officers were vindicated, that their killing of 3 human beings, 2 of whom were totally innocent, did not become the focus of this case. Mr. Howen had the power to bring before the grand jury whatever witnesses he chose. He chose to abuse his powers in the most flagrant and egregious manner yet encountered since the pre-Magna Carta era. Although he could not connect the defendants to the orders or the Aryan nation or to white supremacists, he chose to bring in witnesses who would intentionally prejudice the jury, who would purposely cause the jury to hate and distrust and fear the defendants, and who would create the belief that the defendants were like these criminals. He chose to indict the defendants on charges based on religious beliefs. By this contrivance, the case would be focused on Bruderschweigen I and Bruderschweigen II, and on neo-Nazi criminals who were connected to those organizations. He chose to manipulate the facts in such a fashion that the defendants, whose only crime was to defend themselves and their family, and to insist on the right to worship as they pleased, could never receive a fair trial. He chose to create a criminal, religious conspiracy out of whole cloth so that the wrongs of the federal officers would be lost in the fog of enmity and fear surrounding these defendants. This misconduct, as defined in Mechanic, threatened the defendant's right to fundamental fairness in the criminal process and infringed significantly on the grand jury's ability to exercise its independent judgment in the charging process. The prejudicial hearsay horror stories of these agents that through the unremitting questions of Howen were dumped on the grand jury without connection to Weaver or Harris fully meets the test in Bank of Nova Scotia, where such, quote, egregious misconduct substantially influenced the grand jury decision to indict, unquote, or created, quote, grave doubt, unquote, that, quote, the decision to indict was free from the substantial influence of such violations, unquote. The misconduct of Mr. Howen was so flagrant and egregious as to infringe significantly on the grand jury's ability to exercise its independent judgment in the charging decision, as was the test in United States versus Kilpatrick, 821 F. 2nd, 1456, 10th Circuit Court, 1987, and affirmed by the Supreme Court in Bank of Nova Scotia. The test focuses on the grand jury's process and independence. That's from Kilpatrick Supra. Cumulative wrongs before the grand jury. Our own Ninth Circuit in United States versus Simango, 607 F. 2nd, 877, Ninth Circuit Court, 1979, dealt with the issue of cumulative prosecutorial abuse. In dismissing the indictment, the court said this, quote, the cumulative effect of the errors and indiscretions, none of which alone might have been enough to tip the scales, operated to the defendant's prejudice by producing a biased grand jury, unquote. 1D at 844. The Ninth Circuit affirmed the district court's dismissal of an indictment, saying the acts of the prosecution represented, quote, a serious threat to the integrity of the judicial process, unquote. The accumulation of wrongs by this prosecutor, a witness and participant himself, create overwhelming grounds for dismissal and beg for the court's intercession. Here we have seen the prosecutor guiding the witnesses as they flooded the grand jury with improper evidence. We have seen him testify before that body, observed his prejudicial remarks, his presentation of days of unrelated inflammatory testimony about the hard crimes of the Aryan nations, his attempt to frighten the grand jury, all without connection to the defendants. These acts, and more, create an accumulation of egregious wrongs that destroyed the independent judgment of the grand jury. The prosecution's attempt to prejudice the grand jury. The Ninth Circuit has twice held that an indictment can be dismissed for prosecutorial misconduct if the prosecutor brings irrelevant and prejudicial evidence before the grand jury which induces the grand jury to indict. That can be found in United States versus Simango, 607F, 2nd, 871, 9th Circuit Court, 1979, and United States versus Al Muderis, 695F, 2D, 1182, 9th Circuit Court, 1983. In Al Muderis, citing Simango, the court said, quote, "Courts may dismiss an indictment as an exercise of their inherent supervisory power," unquote. The court went on to warn prosecutors, quote, "The government is on notice that this court will not brook behavior that degrades the grand jury into a rubber stamp, and the testing of the prosecutor's evidence into an empty ritual. The many earnest and discerning questions of this grand jury manifest the vitality of this ancient institution. Prosecutors owe it respect, not condescension, manipulation, or substituted judgment," unquote. In United States versus Sarubo, 604F 2D 807 3rd Circuit Court 1979, Judge Gibbons, writing for the panel, found the prosecutor's misconduct, quote, "extreme," unquote, and the court noted this, quote, "The graphic and misleading reference to Cosa Nostra hatchet men, for example, was a blatant invitation to associate the defendants with a disfavored criminal class. Certainly the references to Frank Sindoni's violent conduct and organized crime associations went far beyond what ADA Standard 3.5 would permit. 3.5 provides in part that the prosecutor should not make statements or arguments in an effort to influence the grand jury in a manner which would be impermissible at trial before a petit jury," unquote. The prosecutor in Sarubo, with other misconduct, associated the defendants without evidentiary basis with organized crime and referred to loan sharking charges against persons with whom he was trying to link the defendants without informing the grand jurors that such persons had been acquitted. The predicate for the Sarubo holding was the constitutional right to an unbiased grand jury. And the court ruled this way, quote, "In federal criminal proceedings, the right to indictment by an unbiased grand jury is guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment, Costello versus United States 350, U.S. 359, 1956. When the framers of the Bill of Rights placed that requirement in the Fifth Amendment, quote, they were not engaged in a mere verbal exercise," unquote, United States versus Estepa 471F, 2D, 1132, 2nd Circuit Court, 1972. Schwartz versus United States Department of Justice 494F, Supplement 1268, ED, Pennsylvania, 1980. And United States versus Hogan, 712F, 2D, 757, 2nd Circuit Court, 1983, the court would not tolerate the attempt of the prosecutor to prejudice the grand jury by wrongfully associating the defendants with the underworld. They ruled in this manner, quote, "The impartiality and independent nature of the grand jury process was seriously impaired by the AUSA's argument that Hogan was a real hoodlum who should be indicted as a matter of equity. Added to this inflammatory rhetoric were the numerous speculative references to other crimes of which Hogan was, quote, suspected," unquote. These government accusations and others appear to have been made not to support additional charges, but in order to depict appellants as bad persons and thereby obtain an indictment for independent crimes. This tactic is fundamentally unfair, unquote. The duty to advise the grand jury that the testimony is hearsay. The prosecutor had the duty to advise the grand jury that the testimony of Davis and Byerly was the grossest of hearsay, even fiction. In Hogan Supra, the court summed the matter up. ruled in this manner, quote, although there is no prohibition on the use of hearsay evidence before a grand jury, our decision in United States versus Estefa 471F 2D 1132 2nd Circuit Court 1972 indicates that extensive reliance on hearsay testimony is disfavored. More particularly, the government prosecutor in presenting hearsay evidence to the grand jury must not deceive the jurors as to the quality of the testimony they hear. 1D at 1137. Heavy reliance on secondary evidence is disfavored precisely because it is not first-rate proof. It should not be used without cogent reason. See American Bar Association, Standards for Criminal Justice, Commentary to Standard 3-3, 6 at 350, 2nd edition 1980, and never be passed off as quality proof when it is not, unquote. Here witnesses testified for days concerning the alleged bad acts of the Aryan nations in Order 1 and 2 without the slightest indication from the prosecutor that the testimony was nothing more than mere storytelling. We wonder what any court would think when it sees that even fiction was given to the grand jury as a basis for its indictment of Weaver and Harris. See the long references to the Turner Diaries in Davis's grand jury testimony, pages 42 and 43. As a general proposition, unfavorable rulings on motions to dismiss indictments are not reviewable pre-trial, but the Ninth Circuit, finding that United States versus Mechanic, 475 U.S. 66, 106, Supreme Court, 938, 89, Law Editions, 2nd 50, 1986, effectively rendered the appellant's grand jury claims unreviewable after trial, allowing an interlocutory appeal in United States versus Benjamin, 812 F 2D 548, 9th Circuit Court, 1987. Quote, the question before us then is whether the effect of Mechanic will be to deprive appellants of any effective review of their claim after final judgment. Another way to put the question is to ask whether, after giving full precedential effect to Mechanic, we would be able to afford appellants any relief if their contentions prove to be meritorious. We conclude that the answer is no. Good night, folks, and God bless you all.
In the mountains up near Sandpoint, north of Naples, Idaho, eagles gathered there together, guard the truth so you might know. Down the road that followed Deep Creek, at the turn that crossed the bridge, federal marshals had the roadblock, mark the siege of Ruby Ridge. There the armies of the enemy slayed your bride and only son, nearly killed your close companion when the shrapnel pierced his lung. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. On that evening, late one August, you were forced to take your stand. There two strangers as they trespassed drew first blood on private land. Governor Andrus back in Boise let the enemy tell him lies, and from his anti-Christ decision, Sam and Vicky lost their lives. Federal agents, U.S. Marshal, and FBI men stormed the hills, all on false, fictitious charges, given orders shoot to kill. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Though the armies of the enemy may surround us in the night, There's a host of heavenly angels hovering near, ready to fight. We stand with you, Randy Weaver. We are proud to call you friend. As we gather here together, stand beside you till the end. We stand with you, Randy Weaver, 'cause your Lord and Savior lives. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body is. Wheresoever eagles gather, that is where his body